Hello and welcome to Ethics 201, Business Ethics and Corporate Social Responsibility, Lecture 10, which is in week 11. And in this week we're looking at ethical leadership and culture. Once again, the resources for the lecture have been adapted from the textbook resources and some other input by me. We've also got some supporting videos, one on creating ethical culture, a discussion by several CEOs, Tim Cook from Apple, John Hesselman from Magnetrol, on what it takes to be an ethical leadership. We've got a video that links our main themes together, talking about legal and ethical obligations and how leadership and culture relate to those two things. And finally, I've got an interesting video that discusses one of the Trump organization's failed investments and the ethics associated in that investment. And that's from the Rachel Maddow show. So lots of practical examples that should bring the theory and practice that we're discussing to life. So, on successful completion of the lecture and the associated activities, students should be able to define corporate culture and discuss its relationship with ethical culture. In other courses, you probably have already defined corporate culture. We're going to define ethical culture and discuss the dimensions found to influence ethical and unethical behaviour. We're going to identify the term ethical leadership and the qualities that an ethical leader has. And we're going to identify and discuss what can be done at the organisational level to encourage ethical behaviour. And finally, we're going to discuss how ethical behaviour does not have to conflict with economic performance of the company. Pardon me, I have a little bit of a cold today. But I'm sure we'll be able to get through this re-recording of the lecture. So, Objective 1, define the term corporate culture and discuss its relationship with ethical culture. Corporate culture, in this course, we're going to use the Robin and Reidenbach definition: a general constellation of beliefs, mores, customs, value systems, and behavioural norms, and ways of doing business that are unique to each corporation, that set a pattern of corporate activities and actions, and that describe implicit and emergent patterns of behaviour. Implicit and emergent means things that you expect to happen in the organisation and things that emerge and change in the way things are occurring in the organisation. And the emotions characterising life in the organisation. So let's look at some of the underlying aspects of organisational culture. In some models of organisational culture, these are called artefacts. The artefacts are language. And remember that many organisations use jargon as a way of shorthand communication with the organisation that can include or exclude people. And words may have particular meanings within an organisation that are different to the way that words have a meaning outside. But it can also be the nationality of the language. Different MNCs may have a corporate language, and that will influence the behaviours within that culture. The technology used, the clothing, uniforms, not uniforms, tie, not tie, etc. Manner of address, the myths and stories that how the firm was created and what the firm means. It might be a published list of values, organisational charts, structural processes, and observed rituals and ceremonies. Now, these things here come together as a set of espoused values and beliefs. And the espoused values and beliefs are what the firm says it's going to do, says it believes in. And we've all worked in organisations where the stated or espoused values and beliefs don't match the actual values and beliefs, the patterns of behaviour that emerge or exist or are implicit about the way things actually occur But the espoused values and release are the stated strategies, the goals, the philosophies that work to help employees reduce uncertainty and deal with certain situations to guide their work behaviour. The taken for granted beliefs and values are the underlying assumptions that are not confrontable and not debatable, that are necessary for organisation membership. What we pay attention to, what things mean, our emotional reactions, what actions do we take in a given situation. They're the underlying assumptions built on those artefacts that lead us to having a corporate culture. When we look at the relationship between, I just realised I've got a slide that's out of order. Corporate culture may not always condone unethical behaviour, but sometimes the norms and the values of an organisation may ignore or fail to prevent unethical behaviour from occurring. It might be that people behave unethically to get ahead in the company. It might be what conduct is rewarded or punished. It might be the way that the values are actually instilled within the employees, whether they are something that's modelled by the management above those employees. Which brings us to our second area of discussion. What is ethical culture? But to bridge into that second area of discussion, I just want to come back to this statement, which draws together the link between culture and business ethics. So in our model of organizational ethics, we're going to talk about ethical leadership, the personal morality and leader morality that exists. We're going to talk about how, and that's objective number 3. We're going to talk about ethical culture, management commitment, capability, role modeling, and positive reinforcement. That's objective number 2 and 4, and how we institutionalize ethics, codes of conduct, politics, training, reward systems, monitoring, recruitment, and selection, which is objective number 4. And as I said, objective number 5 is demonstrating that you can be ethical and still have and still be economically viable. So that behaving ethically doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be profitable and, for example, sustainable. So let's look at corporate culture. Let's look at ethical culture, because we've talked about corporate culture. See, one slide out of order, and it's tripped my normal fluid delivery just a little bit off. So in objective 2, we're going to define ethical culture and discuss the key dimensions found to influence ethical culture. So, what are the key influences? The ethical climate is the organisation's prescriptions, permissions that determine what constitutes ethical conduct. The ethical climate contributes to the ethical culture, which is the organisational capacity and conditions that encourage ethical behaviours in the organisation. Ethical behaviours can be supported through role modelling, the ethical role modelling behaviour by managers and supervisors, showing the people what is the ethical way to behave in the organisation, what is acceptable ethically, just as other aspects of corporate culture can be role modelled. We're going to, the second component is having the capability to behave ethically. For example, Many organisations, as you know, we've talked about this a little bit in international ethics in the global world earlier in this course. You have an organisation that has a code of conduct that says their suppliers must meet certain human resource management obligations, occupational health and safety, no child labour, for example, while at the same time they might set up performance indicators that means that the people who are obliged to ensure that that's occurring cannot do it because they don't have the financial or the human resources to be able to go and monitor and ensure that those goals are being met, or that there's just the pricing constraints that are placed on them, the costing constraints, means that they have to cut, or they feel they must cut corners to reach particular objectives. So you not only have to have the role model and the ethical behaviour prescribed, you also have to have the capability to do, the capacity to do that. You need commitment of managers and employees to behave ethically. You need openness of managers and employees to discuss ethical issues. And you need to reinforce ethical behaviour so that it is, in fact, either rewarded through payment, through promotion, through retaining organisation membership, or alternatively so that it is a behaviour that it means the person loses their organisational membership. Now, many of you have looked at the media this week, and in fact today there's one of those cases that's occurred in America of an African-American man effectively being killed by a police officer on video. Frequently what happens when this occurs is that the police claim that they have done everything right. They decry the victim, they destroy the victims, accuse them of being an attempted cop killer or resisting arrest, and come up with some way that the unethical behaviour of killing or injuring that person is justifiable. And even if that doesn't happen and the person is placed on some type of leave, eventually, after the union negotiation and an internal review by the police, finally the outcome is that the police person did nothing wrong. That's been a pretty typical ethical cultural behaviour by US police forces. Today we have the opposite. We had an African-American man that was arrested supposedly for an act of forgery. And I was in a Costco car park. I believe it was a Costco car park. It might have been some other supermarket car park. So the only act of forgery I can think of might be something to do with vouchers or check pandering. So not violent crime. He was arrested and a police officer, he was held down by two police. They handcuffed him, so it obviously was, even if he had been a threat before, was no longer a threat. The police officer sat on his neck with his knee, and it was being filmed. Another police officer tried to block vision of a crowd that had gathered. It was daylight, like a normal afternoon. And they were all telling him, "You're choking him." He was saying he couldn't breathe. And eventually, after 3.5 minutes, he was unconscious. An ambulance was called. The police claimed that they called the ambulance. You can very clearly hear an ambulance being called by bystanders. And the individual died. Now, what was the response? All four of those police, the one that was blocking, the one that had his knee on the throat, which is probably the cause of death, the one that was sitting on him on the ground, who'd handcuffed him, and that officer's partner, who was apparently standing somewhere behind and out of shot, have all been fired. And the mayor has come out saying it's an unacceptable behaviour. So we've had a very strong reinforcement in that community of what should be ethical behaviour. It should be legal behaviour. Which is a counterpoint to what we've seen with another case of a African-American jogger being killed by vigilantes, alleged vigilantes. Now, I've summarised those two cases, and I've decided not to put the videos on the website because they're disturbing, but I'm sure you'll be able to search for those if you want to watch them. Okay. Right. So we're going to take a small break now, and during that break I'd like you to watch the video on creating ethical culture, which bridges us to our discussion of ethical leadership and what it is to be an ethical leader, which is objective 3.